Hi everybody, I'm Amy Mesney from Amy Mesney's Teaching Ideas for You. I'm here today to talk to you about directed versus facilitated instruction. This is the third day of the Mastery Grading series. And so far what we've learned about Mastery Grading is that it focuses on the student's mastery of standards. And what it does, the layout of Mastery Grading, is if you organize your lessons in a way that you have a feedback loop. You have instruction, practice, feedback, instruction, practice, feedback. It helps kids to build their metacognition. It helps students to learn what they understand and what they didn't understand, and you catch those misconceptions. And you also use scoring for the classwork versus grading. Now, we talked about scoring versus grading yesterday, and so that's video 2. But by using scoring for the practice work, you actually encourage students to take risks and to participate, to pay attention, and to practice, because they don't have the risk of being punished if they fail. So the whole system, once you use it in your classroom and you get it going and you get the student buy-in when they understand how it works, it increases student engagement, which eventually will help increase student achievement as well. And another perk for the teacher is that it reduces the teacher grading. So today we want to talk about how can you set up your classroom. So we talked about that feedback loop yesterday. So the goal with the instruction is you want to have the lesson, students need to practice, students need to go over their practice and get the feedback on how they did, be able to ask questions, and then if you need to reteach, you can reteach. If they're ready to move on, you move on. So how should you set up the lessons? So a lot of us grew up doing a lot of direct learning, directed instruction, direct learning, where the teacher is the center of all knowledge. So the teacher lectures, or the teacher is the main person giving the answers to everything. Think of things like lecture, a lot of skill and drill, practice, practice, practice. So the teacher is doing the grading, the teacher is passing it back. Students think that the teacher is giving them their grade. So I'm not bashing directed learning at all. I'm a good direct learner. I really was good with things like taking notes from the professor and learning that way. So it's not necessarily that you shouldn't use directed learning at all. But what you see in Mastery Grading is it's just one tool in your toolbox. So instead of being the main tool, it's just one tool. So again, a problem with directed learning, and one of the reasons why you want to move away from it, is because students don't see themselves as the owners of their learning. They see the teacher doing all the grading, analyzing that, telling them what they understood and what they didn't understand. They aren't the ones who are saying, wow, I guess I really didn't understand that. Can you explain it to me? And so you want to make sure that you're setting up your lessons in a way that students are analyzing their own work, because you want them to build their metacognition. So by moving away from having mostly directed learning to facilitated learning and directed learning, you end up with students who are active participants in their learning versus passive participants in their learning. So what can you do for facilitated learning? Facilitated learning uses a variety of strategies. You can mix them up. You can find out which ones work best for different classes of students. So again, you're going to use directed instruction sometimes, independent practice, collaborative learning. There's a lot of different ways. Elementary school, we do a lot of partner talk, think, pair, share. You have table talks where the table groups work together. So there isn't just one or two strategies. There's actually a lot of different ones out there. And again, some students will learn really well independently. So you want to have independent practice too. But one thing you're trying to do is you want to make sure that your classroom is built on collaboration and not competition. Now, I'm not saying that you can't play any games where groups compete against each other, but I think of it more like my kids both do sports, and one's a runner and one's a swimmer. And really with those, you're on a team, but you're also really competing against yourself. You're not trying to beat your teammates' time. You're trying to beat your time from the last time you did it. Now, eventually when you're at the meet, you want to be the one with the best time, but how you measure your progress is, hey, did I improve from the last time I went to a meet? So that's what we want to see in our classroom. We want kids seeing their own growth and measuring their own growth. So you want them to learn to collaborate with the other students to improve their learning, but you're not trying to pit students against each other like the smart group and the lower group. And, you want to move away from that type of thing. I don't think a lot of teachers do that type of thing, but you do have to really teach them how to collaborate. And that's part of the issue. I know, have you ever done that where you just kind of let them work on something in group work and you think they're going to know what to do, and then you've got 2 or 3 kids that really have no idea how to work with other people. Collaboration is really something that we have to talk about and model and teach to students. So the goal, again, to move to more facilitated learning is to increase that student engagement, the student ownership. We want to stop being the sage on the stage, because that, one, gives you a lot of stress. 2, it puts all the responsibility on you as a teacher. You're responsible for knowing everything, for grading everything, for doing everything. And especially as students are getting older, what I would expect a 4th grader to be able to do is probably less than what I'm going to expect from a senior. But we slowly need to release that responsibility to students, because otherwise when they're an adult, how are they going to determine what, well, I need to be responsible for this, or I need to be responsible for that? I mean, the goal that we have as teachers is to help them to be responsible adults. And part of that is to know what you need to do and know what you already have done. So that's one of the things I think about is, when I spent those years doing a lot of stuff where I was the person who was the master of the classroom, I really wasn't putting much responsibility on the student. And that's really a life goal that we need to do. So how can you facilitate instruction? I forgot to move my slides. Let me do that for you. We want to design our units. So what I do when I would plan out things, I plan by units. I'm a big block thinker. So I don't think, what am I going to do this week? I start with a unit. So if I'm teaching colonial America, I'm trying to plan that all out. Like, I want to hit these standards, students need to do these things. So within that unit, as you're designing it, you want to promote the collaborative relearning. You want to teach them how to use peer review and self-assessment. So again, these aren't things they're going to know how to do out of the box. You're going to have to spend time at the beginning of the year teaching it. But collaborative learning, peer review, self-assessment, these help students build metacognition. Metacognition is knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. So it's catching those misconceptions or misunderstandings before you get to the assessment and find out that they didn't really understand it, because you want the students to start recognizing that they misunderstood it and that they're asking you questions. So again, like we talked about yesterday, another thing you want to move to with building your units is you're going to change from grading everything to grading only the assessments, the mastery assessments, your summative things. All of the formative things are going to be scored. If you missed yesterday's session, really go back and take a look at that. That is an eye-opener, and it will cut your grading down tremendously. And it encourages students to take a risk and try that practice so that they can actually improve. Another thing that you really want to do when you facilitate your instruction is students need to know what the objective is. What is the goal of this activity? You're not just putting them in a small group and having them talk. They need to know clearly, our goal is to understand, why immigrants came to the colonies, or whatever your standard is. And so they need to know the topic and the end goal. What is the result that we're supposed to have by the end of this session? So it's important that teachers are clear with what the objectives are. Students need to know what the end goal is. So let's talk about building the metacognition. So metacognition, again, you want students to really start knowing what they know and recognizing what they don't know or don't understand. So a couple different things that you can use to do, to build this metacognition: collaborative groups. Okay, again, these could be a small group. It could just be a two-person, the shoulder partner group. It doesn't have to be a big group. Sometimes the kids can self-select their group. Sometimes teachers want to select the group. And again, I think you teach them how to pick their group. So I'm trying to think how I want to explain this. So for example, you have two kids that just don't work well together. They might be best friends, but they don't work well together. So sometimes you pull those kids aside and you say, so when you were in the group yesterday, how did it work with you two together? Did you learn a lot? Did you get your work done? Did you meet the objective? Students need to start realizing who they work well with, who they don't work well with, and they need a little guidance with that. It's another way you can teacher pick groups, of course, is by ability levels. I don't use ability level for every group. One, you get the same kids in the same groups, they get frustrated. Also, kids change their ability level. So they might be really strong, say, in addition, but they really might struggle with subtraction. So you constantly have to reassess your data and pick who's in what group. With integrating a lot of reading and writing and social studies, I'm often looking more at their reading ability and their reading level. And it's amazing. If it's something they're really interested in, some kids can do a much higher level group. I've had kids who were super interested in like World War II, and they knew everything about World War II. And because they already had so much background knowledge, they were able to read on a higher level. So sometimes you have to kind of look at those types of things and form your groups. So the collaborative group, my brother and I have talked about this because we both use mastery grading. Within that collaborative group, you need to teach students that their group is responsible to share the important information. So for example, if they're sharing their information with each other, so if they're all reading a passage, they're discussing what's in it and sharing their insights out of it. They're sharing notes. They're going to share materials. Say if their group member is absent for one class, somebody needs to be responsible for getting that paper for them and either putting it in their folder or holding it till the next day. And also the peer review, which we're going to talk more about. So the other thing we've already touched on, number 2, is the clear learning objectives. My brother and I, we've talked about this. If we don't tell kids the goal, they don't really know what the purpose is. I mean, think about if you went into some activity, sometimes your professional development is like this. Like you're there, but you really don't know why you're there. And you're not really sure how you're going to use it. Kids are the same way. If they don't understand why they're doing X activity, they get off topic, they start doing other things, they disengage because they don't know the purpose. So having your standards is a great way to focus kids on the goal. Another one is to use essential questions. Essential questions can really tie together the purpose of a unit. So as you can see behind me, those are some examples of standards posters. And so you just change them out for your unit or your lesson. You might have an extra one. But my brother uses this a lot in his class where he says every activity, he'll direct them back to the standard and say, okay, so how does this tie into X? And he makes kids think about it. He keeps that goal or standard to the front of their mind. especially in a history class, that the essential question, the EQ, can be really helpful for that. So if you're trying to determine what is the purpose of government, and you do an activity and then you say, okay, so from this reading or from this activity, what do you think about the purpose of government? What is it? So you constantly redirect them back to the goal. So that helps them to build their metacognition, because they start to see what do they know about that objective and maybe what don't they understand yet. So that's the purpose of having the goal at the forefront, the objective. And the next one is hard for a lot of people: critical feedback. I don't know about you, but if you spend any time on social media, even adults can't do critical feedback. Everybody gets so offended if somebody says something to them. So this is definitely something students need to learn. You need to model it. It's not going to come naturally for a lot of kids. It doesn't come naturally for a lot of adults. And so you have to model. And you might have to model for quite a while for some students. Or when you start breaking up into those small groups, you might want to put the ones that are still having a hard time giving critical feedback in a group where you can go and kind of model in a smaller group if the other kids have already kind of caught on. So the trick with critical feedback is you have to show them that it's safe to be critical and to be critiqued, that it's not a personal attack. You want to make sure kids understand that you're not attacking the person. You're critiquing them so that they can improve whatever it is that you're critiquing. So, you might look at an essay and say, well, this piece here, I don't quite understand your purpose, or what are you trying to say? Can you explain that to me better? So you can critique nicely, but still get them to understand where they can improve. And so if kids get offended when they receive critical feedback, other students are also going to not want to give critical feedback. So you have to kind of model both asking the questions and receiving the feedback. So it should be respectful. Critical feedback is not a put down. It's not sarcasm. You also have to model what it's not. So think about that. You want to model good behaviors and things that are going to be offensive, so they're no longer critical feedback. Another problem that you have, and especially in high school where you're trying to get kids to do more of this on their own, is that middle school and high schoolers, they want to be nice. They don't want their friends to be mad. They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So you have to teach them that sometimes being nice can actually hurt their friend, because they're not learning anything, or they can't improve if you're just nice, And I know I had trouble with that in high school. I was a good writer, and I had a student ask me if I could look over his writing, and I didn't want to say anything bad. So did he learn anything? No. If I had gave him some tips, or if I had given him some tips, could he probably have improved or maybe learned something? He probably could have. So because I was too shy or too afraid to say something, I really kept him from learning. And so you need to model that and explain that as well to students, because especially middle school, high school, a lot of people want to be nice. They don't want to hurt people's feelings. All right, so we already talked about the collaborative groups, learning objectives, critical feedback. So student self-assessment. So we want students to learn how to assess their own work. Again, if you are doing all the grading, the student isn't doing any of the analysis of their own work. They're waiting for you to hand it back. And if your students are like my students, they look at the grade and they don't really look at anything else. You know how we write those copious notes on essays about all the things they could do? Half of the kids, they look at it and they throw it in the trash. So instead of us being the ones to analyze, we want the students to analyze their own work. So again, you use the scoring over grading to encourage students to do this, because instead of you grading everything, you're going to take 10 to 15 minutes in class to go over this work. Students grade their own work. So my brother and I talked about it, a few different ways that we could do this. One thing we said, I know a lot of problems is you run out of time for that formative assessment at the end of the class period. I know that was always an issue for me. I talk too much, so then I end up running over and get late. So we talked about like exit tickets. So you could either have exit tickets ready, and instead of having them do that at the end of class, that's just their homework. It's just something little, couple minutes. Or you could even make that the bell ringer. I've seen a lot of bell ringers that, I have to be honest, I don't always know how they tie into the curriculum. Like they're just what my brother calls busy work. You know, it keeps kids busy, but it doesn't necessarily build any of the skills that you're trying to build. So if you're like me and you always run out of time for that review at the end of class, then while you are, you know, taking attendance and passing out whatever you need to do, have the kids do their exit ticket as a bell ringer. And then you take 10 minutes to go over it. So what my brother says he does in his class, now he teaches high school English now, but he's taught social studies and elementary school. So what he has been doing with his high schoolers is he will have them do the assessment or, you know, the practice work, whatever it is, and then he'll just put the answers up on his screen. I want to say overhead, but you might have better technology than that. And so the kids check it, and then they spend a couple minutes asking questions, and you model how to do that. So, okay, so I missed this question. I don't really understand why. I don't understand the answer. You're teaching them how to ask those questions so they can correct their misunderstanding. And he said he literally spends 10 to 15 minutes, and that's it. And that's what you're trying to do. If homework is extra and it's not really leading to mastery, then it's not serving its purpose. You know, all your activities should be leading to student mastery, including the time that you spend going over work. So again, if you're just collecting it and passing it back, it's almost wasted time. So you want to move to more of the student grading and using the scoring. Okay. And we talked yesterday too that you want to make sure students understand how scoring affects their grade, how it can benefit their grade, but it's not going to, you know, you can't get an A on participation and then fail the test. And we talked about that yesterday as well. Now, the last one that we have for building cognition or metacognition is student control. And I want to make sure I explain this. I don't mean that students get to pick what they want to do and what they don't want to do. What my brother and I talked about, and we mean by this, is that students need to feel like they can participate and they're not going to get shot down. So for example, if you're asking kids to brainstorm or give answers, and if they get corrected right away, they're probably not going to give any more answers. So what we mean by control is that students feel like they have enough control to pose an idea or to give a solution to something, and they're not going to immediately be squashed. You know, they want to feel like they're encouraged to participate, encouraged to throw out an idea. Now, I'm not saying that if it's wrong that you don't go back and correct it, but I've seen, and I know I've done this with my own kids sometimes, where they'll say something and you're like, no, that's a silly idea. I mean, I've just discouraged them from asking me something in the future or throwing out an idea for me in the future. So there's just ways that you can take all those ideas and then go back through and have students even discuss, well, which of these ideas do you think works and which ones, you know, and it goes back to that critical feedback where you're critiquing, but you're not criticizing. So there's a difference in that, and I think the student control goes with that. So again, teachers are trying to encourage risk-taking. You want them to take educational risks, to try something new or to give an answer even if they're not sure. And so that's what we mean by the student control. So I hope that this has helped you to understand the differences between directed instruction and facilitated instruction. I do have my posters on sale, and I also make checklists, because I use these. We had data folders in elementary school, and I know some middle and high schools do as well. So they're just simple checklists. Let me figure out how to hold it. So I have the standards like this, and then what I did for my students is I have multiple columns, and then when we would say, if we were working on summarizing, then we might have a quick conference, or we're in a small group, and I would say, well, how do you feel you're doing on summarizing? Like, do you understand it? Let's look at what your summary is there. How did you do? And so they might start out being a beginner, but as you revisit the skill, they can adjust it and improve it. So I have checklists like this, and then I have the standards all ready, and my brother and I have both used these. What I do is I simply put them in a binder, and I put them in these page protectors, and then I just use these to hang them up. Instead of taking them out of the sleeves, I just take the sleeves out of the binder, and I use push pins, or if you want to Velcro, you could Velcro, but for me personally, I just find the push pins are so much easier. Staples are a mess. They mess up your plastic, they mess up your paper. And if I have to go searching for it, I'm never going to find it. So I keep them all organized in these binders, and then I have them by the breakdown. So like informational reading, literature, I have reading like that. And then I just go through and pull out the standard that I need and change them. Now, if you're in Florida, I have all the standards for the different subject areas. So I do have the Florida standards for science, social studies, the language arts, the math. If you are a Common Core state, I just have the math and the language arts. And if I don't happen to have your grade level, just pop me an email, and I can probably work it into my work schedule. But these will be 20% off all of my posters and checklists today and tomorrow. When you go into my TPT store, if you look at the categories on the left-hand side, I have it broken down to Common Core standards like K through 3, Common Core standards 4 through 6, and then I have Florida standards, FSA, the same way, just to make it easier for people to find them. So tomorrow, our last session on mastery grading is all about differentiated instruction. And I know differentiated instruction was something that was really hard for me to figure out at first. And what I found that I was doing is I was making differentiated instruction much more complicated than it has to be. I find I do that a lot, because sometimes we go to professional development and they present things, I think, in the most difficult way that it can be done, and then that's held up as the example. But really, with mastery grading and the collaborative learning, and what I mean by that is the collaborative grouping that you're doing, the differentiation can actually be much easier than it's often presented. So that'll be our last topic on mastery grading tomorrow. And again, it'll be tomorrow at 1. So I hope you can come, and I hope that you found this useful. Thank you for coming. This was Amy Mesney from Amy Mesney's Teaching Idea for You. Thank you.